Morning, Tim.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. I love the happy sign behind you.
Oh yes, that was the remnants of a birthday surprise for my other half last year.
Very good. We like HAPPY. It's a good uplifting thing.
Absolutely.
So, Tim Brownstone. To carry on our theme, we had Paul Gaffney last week, who won his charity won best charity in the Southwest Business Awards, sponsored by Great British Expos, and you were best entrepreneur. Was that right?
Male entrepreneur. Yes, correct.
Male entrepreneur, yes, just in case you were something else. So I thought I'd read out a quote from Mr. Brownstone, which reason I found this so fascinating was actually it sounds like me. So I'll tell you what my version of this is. So this is one of Tim's sayings. I'm never satisfied with merely achieving initial goals and letting that be the end of it. I'm always looking to move forward. So when did you first say that, out of interest?
Oh, I'm not sure when I first said it, but I've always sort of had that mantra in my life, whether it be in sports or academics or whatever it may be. Just always looking for continued success and striving forwards.
Yeah, something I say probably at least once a week is what's good enough yesterday isn't good enough today, and what's good enough today isn't good enough for tomorrow. So I think life's all about adaptation and evolution, personally.
Absolutely. Yep. Very true words to live by.
Yeah, good. So it's nice to have a bit of like-mindedness. I'm feeling quite enthused already.
Good.
So where does Tim Brownstone hail from? Where is home?
Originally from Reading, which is now where the business is based, and I live in North Hampshire, just south of that, in a little village called Sherborne St John.
Oh, okay. Is that anywhere near Alton or anything like that? And
it's west of Alton.
Melbourne, maybe.
Closest to Basingstoke is the largest.
Okay.
Town.
So what's that? 25 miles of commute a day or something?
I think it's about 20 door to door. Yeah. Thereabouts.
Okay, very good. So, what was life like in Reading when you were growing up? What were your parents like? Were they good parents to be a great man like yourself now, or were they aspirational, or what?
They were great parents. Not so much into any sort of inkling of entrepreneurship. Mother is a teacher, and my father used to design and build email systems for Hewlett Packard. Okay. But yeah, very, very, very nice upbringing. Didn't live in Reading beyond the age of 4. Parents moved into Hampshire to build their own home, and obviously I came with them.
Yeah, so that probably was quite helpful because yeah, it would have been quite difficult, wouldn't it, for 4-year-old Tim to be
yes, quite
on his own. That's quite a desperate thought, really, isn't it? So did you play sport when you were little Tim?
I always was sort of active because we had horses, so that was my sort of main sport, but non-competitively. And then in sort of the early teenage years, little Tim was not so little; he was quite chubby. and then sort of from the ages of sort of 12 onwards, I started picking sport up more seriously, and it sort of took off from there, really.
Yeah, so I see. As a sportsman myself, so you ran 200 meters, is that right?
Until the age of, I always forget it was 16 or 17, but I picked up a bad injury after my first international meet, and then didn't manage to keep up the performance on the 200, sadly.
Well, just out of interest, what was the fastest time you ever ran in 200 meters?
26.47 as a 16-year-old, I think it was.
Okay. And what is a tetrathlon? I see you've been doing that. What's that all about?
Tetrathlon is running, shooting, swimming, and cross-country horse riding. So it was originally the sports that a cavalry officer had to excel in, and so that was my sort of core sport for, I don't know, a good 7 years or so.
And do you still horse ride today?
I do nowhere near as much as I ought to. I still have a horse, and she's I say cheaper than therapy to maintain.
Do you like horse racing out of interest, things like that?
I've never raced myself. I enjoy sort of watching now and again, but it's the racing is probably my least that I feel a connection with the eventing that everyone can watch. Obviously, this afternoon, GB in the lead position going into the last day at the Olympics. That's
you just took my question away from me. So, do you watch the Olympics? Are you a patriotic sort of person? Would you say?
I am, yes. I was actually watching the cycling while I was in the lobby waiting to speak to your fine self this morning.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I thought the eventing yesterday was very interesting. I thought that the British team, I suppose, were very accomplished, I would have said. And I think, as the commentator said, I thought the horses looked fitter than any of the others. There's one, I think it was a New Zealand rider. The horse looked like it was going to die in the last half mile, and he was talking about nursing it over the line. I don't know if you saw that one.
I did, yes, and unfortunately, fortunately not this in this occurrence, but sometimes both rider or horse can go due to the exhaustion of the event. So I'm pleased that wasn't the case this year.
So what was Tim up to academically at school? Was there anything you particularly liked, didn't like, any particular issue?
I always loved the sciences, and my sort of weaker side was probably my my English skills. I am dyslexic and was more heavily so in my formative years, and worked very hard to sort of get that up and get my A's for GCSE, and then specialised into sort of the sciences going into my A-levels and then on to university.
Which university did you go to?
University of Reading. It was the only course I could find in the country that would allow me to research exactly what I wanted to research rather than picking from a list.
So what were you researching? I'm fascinated.
So I started university with two interests. One was whale neurology, and the other one was...
What was that again?
One was whale neurology.
Whale?
Whale, yes, I'll explain why. And and the other one was infrared, the biological effects of infrared. And the whales didn't win out because the university wouldn't let me put a whale in the MRI scanner, understandably.
Yeah.
But the interest there was because while I was at sixth form, there was a nerve cell or a neuron called a spindle cell that had been discovered, and it was being hailed as what made us human at first. And because it allowed for consciousness and empathy, etc. And then they found it in higher apes, and then they made a last discovery in whales where they found, I think, 11 times the presence that we have as humans, which begged the question: is a whale more conscious than a human is? Which really, sort of got me interested.
No, it's interesting. While we were talking this morning, Drew and myself were talking about souls. Funny enough. And what was your point about? Drew was talking about whether animals had souls, and my sort of view was, without getting too sort of contentious about this, if you were to believe there was a soul, and I'm not saying that I necessarily do, if you have any understanding of evolution, it would be inconceivable to think that at some point in the evolutionary scale, a soul suddenly appeared in Homo erectus or something that wasn't in Anthropolochus or whatever it was called, So, very interesting. I'm one of the things I'm quite passionate about actually is I think we treat animals very badly. And I was reading an article on, I think it was in Rod Liddell's section in the Times yesterday, and it was actually ridiculous. It was a debate about whether animals were sentient, you've only got to look at, I've got 6 cats, for instance, and I stood on one of my cat's tails this morning. To say that cat didn't feel pain would be a complete understatement. So I just think it's quite staggering, the hypocrisy we have and double standards when it comes to animals.
Yes, and everybody's definition varies based on their subjective opinion on where the boundaries lie between, as you say, in this instance, what is sentient and what isn't, and the myriad of different definitions that can feed into being there. And ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, the best practice is just to be good and do what is morally right, irrespective of what it is that you're interacting with.
I would totally agree with that. So, so did the whale thing sort of never kick off? Have you ever pursued any more interest in Wales since?
No, the Wales didn't kick off. The infrared did, and that eventually formatively was the first technology that I ended up bringing into the business world. So it worked out for me okay in the end.
So did you have so when you left university, did you work for someone else first, or did you just go straight into self-employment?
No, I set the company up in my final year of university in the car park behind the agricultural department at University of Reading, and I did apply to one graduate scheme with a company called Halma, and I got through to the last two in the interviews, and the eventual feedback was that they thought I was a little bit too much of an entrepreneurial thinker because they were advertising for entrepreneurs, and so I said, okay, well that sort of confirms the path I should take, and I stuck with the business, and 8.5 years later, here we are.
So how did you come up with the name Kymira?
I was brushing my teeth one evening, looking at my Gillette Fusion razor, and I was trying to think of a word that embodied multiple technologies into an individual product. So originally, I was just trying to name our first product, a pair of leggings, and I thought, oh, well, fusion's a good word, but it's taken by Gillette, and I don't know if the trademarks will overlap because they do use it within the sporting world and medical sense. And in one of the labs at the University of Reading, there is a pickled rabbit fish, and it's a type of deep sea fish, and the label on it said this is an example of a genetic chimera, which meant a combination of in that sense genetic coding. A cat that, for example, has dimorphy, a blue eye and a brown eye, is a chimera. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could use that. I changed the spelling for a KY because it looked a bit cooler, and then IR instead of ER in homage to our infrared.
So it does come from CH Chimera.
Correct, from the Greek classics, yes.
Very good. So, so were you plotting this business career all through university, or was it sort of towards the tail end of it?
No, not at all. I mean, I had taken at least a business module each academic year because it was of interest and I thought they'd be useful life skills. Really, the business came about because I'd technologically been working on something for wound healing, and I had to then clinically verify it and get it through regulatory use before it could be beneficial to the market. And I hadn't got a clue how I was going to fund that. And the PhD, I was worried I would get stuck in a lab for 5 years. And so I started the business really was with a question of, could I use a sports brand to reinvest the money and fund the ongoing medical work? And so that was why I started the business, was to make it happen.
Did you start the business on your own, or did you have any help?
It was on my own. The we at the time was me and the dog. And a bit of advice from parents when asked for and things, but no, it was I was a sole founder, and they were incredibly lonely at times those early days.
So what were you? Were you 21 then, or 22, or what?
And I would have been 22. Yes, correct.
Incredibly brave thing to do.
People always sort of say, "Oh, it's so brave to do this," and I used to say, "Well, actually, I have far more admiration for someone who sets a business up, with a family, husband, wife, two kids, whatever it is, a mortgage to pay. Ultimately, I had no dependents other than my horse. And the reality is, had I not been able to pay for the horse, I'm sure my parents would have stepped up and helped out. So, yes, okay, it may be something that's a different path than many take, but at the same time, it was the easiest time in my life that I could have made that decision, I feel.
I don't know. I mean, I think, bravery takes many forms, doesn't it? And it's interesting because I do a live show for Great British Expos every Friday. And one of the things I talk about every week is courage. I actually think courage is the single most important word in business. So I think, if you think about, you're right in some respects, insofar as, I suppose, if you had failed the ramifications, so for instance, you didn't have a wife that you would be letting down, or a child, one of the things I talk about quite a lot is when I formed Aspen Waite, for instance, I I felt hugely under pressure not to let my children down. You know, it was actually a massive driver to me, that, and probably still is actually. I don't know whether, you know, you can relate to whether you have any fear. Fear of failure is incredibly important, and I don't know, do you find that yourself?
Funnily enough, I couldn't say I've ever directly attributed fear that the company would fail. The fear that I occasionally get will be, or the weight that I feel on my shoulders is, you know, we now have a team of we're just going north of 20 employees with our current recruitment, and that, you know, there are times where I feel the responsibility, I'd say, over the fear very heavily on my shoulders, especially sort of this time last year we were coming back out of it from our business perspective. Yes. But March through May last year, when our primary market went to sleep overnight, you know, was a particularly daunting time. And yes, there was you know, that responsibility and pressure I certainly felt then.
Okay, there's quite a lot of things to come back to after your first track today. So, did Tim enjoy himself at university? Did he boogie around, drink too much, chase the women around, or what? You know, or too busy looking at whales' brains or something?
I enjoyed university, but I was sat there in my graduation ceremony thinking I definitely should have gone out more, because I rode at university, which meant that I was often on a drinking ban, and life was largely built around training. So I did enjoy it, but not perhaps as much from a social perspective as others may have done.
So how important has music been to you in your life?
Music's always been interwoven into my life. One of my biggest regrets, and one day I will put right to the wrong, is that I stopped playing piano and guitar, because at the time I didn't think I had enough time, which compared to more recent workloads seemed like a stupid decision to have made. But yes.
When did you stop doing that then?
Oh, that would have been fairly young, about 15, I think.
Oh gosh,
I stopped. Yeah.
So the first track today is Adagio for strings. I take it that's Samuel Barber's one, is it, or was it a variation? Or
this is the Tiesto track version.
Oh, so I said either, and the reason I love the piece is because it's equally as impactful whether you're in a nightclub or whether you're in a concert hall. I'm more often to listen to the Barber version, but I love both. So
anyway, Drew chose the Tiesto version, so this is Tim's first track today, Adagio for strings, Tiesto version.
Paul Waite.
Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Drew, what have you done to the driving population of the South?
That was bopping.
It's bopping. So I can't really see you as a bit of an acid man there, Tim. You've been known to do this, you know?
Yeah, I enjoy a bit of trance. It used to help me focus back in the sporting days.
So how seriously did you take sport? Were you at national standard at anything?
So I did one international meet with the 200. The tetrathlon was largely a national circuit, but I competed in 2 senior international championships. Didn't place. I was quite middle of the road in terms of standings, and then with the rowing, I was a good lightweight rower, but unfortunately, my time to put myself to the test, which was my final year of university as a lightweight, I ended up with tonsillitis just before the national championships, and wasn't allowed to race. So we'll never know quite how well I could have ranked.
So what led to your depression? At what age were you when that happened?
So that was in my final year of university, and it was my grandfather passing away sort of was what kind of led to it, and was the trigger. Whether there are other factors, I'm not sure. But having had such a sort of core driving force my entire life, I ended up just without anything to push myself forwards or to strive for, which was a very strange position to find myself in.
So how did this depression manifest itself?
Very severe sort of lethargy, and didn't have any focus or any desire to to do anything. At the time I was trying to write my dissertation and I had to finish it. And I could at that point crank out 2,000, maybe 3,000 word essay in a day, and I was struggling to write 200 words. It was, as I said, I didn't really want to train. I didn't want to compete. I didn't want to do my academics. Just all I really wanted to do was, lie in bed and be sad.
That's very nicely said. We were talking about, mental health issues. Is that, if your depression was taking place today, is that what people would say you had? You had mental health issues?
Yeah, well, I think that depression is a mental health issue, and I'm not obviously, as we're discussing it, not ashamed to hold my hands up and say I've experienced it as have many others.
Yeah, I mean, so what's your take on people like Simone Biles? Her very publicized, documented troubles, withdrawing from all the events, the Olympics. Ben Stokes has basically said he doesn't want to play cricket for ages. Do you have any views on that?
Well, I admire them for making the decisions. It's not one that they can come to easily. I think I know Ben Stokes' case less well, but in Simone Biles' case, it wasn't just a manifestation of the mental side of things, but actually she was putting her life at risk because the mental side was impairing her physiologically, and she would, I think, call it the twisties. But I wouldn't want to be doing a triple backflip and then not knowing what way's up and landing and crunching my neck or something. So I think that from a I want to protect my life standpoint, it's not an easy decision to make, especially when you've spent so long dedicated to achieving that singular goal. But I respect her for having done so.
So how long were you in this period of depression for?
Fortunately, comparatively to others, a relatively short period. I think about 4 or 5 months in terms of before I started properly seeing the light again. And as a very sort of logically driven individual, I sort of tried to do everything that I common sense said I should try, and end up going to see a therapist who sort of sat down with me for an hour and a half or so and just sort of said, "Oh well, you've tried everything that I can think to advise you to. So the only thing left is for you to go and get a prescription for some antidepressants." And I've completely irrationally, but I've never been one to take painkillers. I don't particularly like to take drugs if I don't need to. And so I said, well, I'll humor you and I'll go and speak to my GP, who, because of the proximity between the family home and Reading, I was still under the same GP who'd known me since I was 5 years old. And it was, I think, the turning point was really speaking to him, and thanks to his advice, which helped me to come out of things.
Yes, I think, it was amazing, what's the word, fortitude. But I suppose, the fact that you had the sort of personality that took you into high-level sport in the first place would suggest that you had the strength of character to recognize the problem. And one of the things I admire you and my guest last week for Paul Gaffney, who spoke very movingly about his first wife's cancer. I've written 3 books, for instance. The first book was particularly honest, and I wrote about my basically my baptism into business, and how literally I sort of survived, which was disappearing into a wine bottle nearly every night and all that. And I can remember walking around the town at 4 o'clock in the morning with no hope, absolutely, there's nothing left. And one of the things that apart from the love of my children, which was pivotal, one piece of advice I would give other people, I don't know whether you obviously would have thought about this a lot with your battles, is I always sit there and I think, when people, are so troubled, they think about, committing suicide or whatever. I sort of sit there and I think, well, if you just had one good thing happen to you the rest of your life, that's got to be better than not being there. Is it? Have you ever sort of wanted to lecture or write about your troubles and maybe help other people?
Well, I speak as openly as I can about it. I guess lecture more so on the business side as opposed to speaking about my personal element of it, but that often is quite intertwined, as I'm sure you can imagine from your own experiences.
Yeah. So that was quite an amazing year. Your final year at university, you had this prolonged battle with depression. You managed to get your degree, and you were planning what turned out to be an amazing business venture. I think one of the things I think it's amazing. So for a 22-year-old guy, I think if you were looking at the building blocks of a successful business, probably it all starts with a plan and a brand. So did you actually have a brand design to go along with the Kymira name?
I did go to a fellow student business who, a couple of graphic designers who had set up amongst themselves, and they made some logos and stuff for me, but I can't remember how long those original logos lasted. We have rebranded since. And then in terms of the plan, there was a plan there, but I don't think I formally wrote a business plan until 2 or 3 years in, because it would have changed every single week, and I would have spent my entire time writing business plans as opposed to actually running the dynamic parts of the business.
So in very simple summary, when you started Kymira, what was your objective?
It was to get to a point that it was to get the technology out and help people. Ultimately, that's always been my biggest driving force.
This is infrared technology, is it?
Correct, yes, is helping people. And the goal beyond that was, I'll start by helping athletes, and then the money that the athletes give me will help me fund what I need to be able to then help people medically.
And do you think your sporting career helped you greatly in doing that?
Absolutely. I think, to be honest, one of the most valuable things that my sporting career taught me, and the same in both current and ex-athlete employees that we have, is the ability to critically review oneself. I mean, sometimes you can be a little bit too heavy, and as an employer, I now have to sort of say, no, actually, you are doing a good job. But it's a very important skill to be able to look inwardly and say, well, how can I improve? Because it makes it far easier and a more open and comfortable discussion with your line manager, rather than it being, a mortal wound that someone has said you're not absolutely perfect and that there's a path for you to improve and progress.
So in fairly simple terms that people could understand, how have you actually used infrared technology to drive your business forward? How does it all work?
So it works by, we embed a very specific blend of minerals into the fibers that make the yarn, that make the fabrics. And they basically capture a broad spectrum of energy. So, for example, visible light, UV, body heat, and then they convert it into a very narrow bandwidth of the infrared spectrum. That's re-emitted back into the wearer's body, where it penetrates roughly 4 centimeters and induces a number of different biochemical reactions. So for an athlete, actually athletic or not, we speak to an ecosystem of where our products can be put to good use. So that is the preparation. So as an athlete, obviously that's for exercise. For the medical side, that could be going to Waitrose. The performance of your task, the recovery of from said task, and then the either rehabilitative effects or the prevention of injury or a condition getting worse on the medical side of our work.
Excellent. Okay, so next track you've picked is Remember the Name by Fort Minor. So why did you pick this?
This one is one that throughout my athletic career and then the business career very much epitomized, I think, a lot of the the feelings I've had going through and remembering that you don't get anything easily. I think is it takes blood, sweat, and tears to achieve what you want to.
Wise words.
This is Paul Waite on Aspen Waite Radio.
I'm not sure I've ever heard that before, Tim, but of course, Drew reminded me that was the voice of Mike Shinoda, who was
Indeed.
obviously with Linkin Park, and another song I really like is by the Executioners, which I've played a couple of times, which Mike Shinoda did the lead on. So I liked the was it 50% Pain? That was
That's it. Yep.
You must have only been about 15 when that song came out.
I was pretty young. Yes, correct.
So do you have songs which you cling to or give you like anthems to you? Would you say?
Well, I think that those that we've listened to today are two that have stuck with me, and then if they're associated to a particularly sort of painful or joyous part of my life, then they're more likely to stay there after. I have a playlist on my Spotify account, which is called Headspace, which is one that I just go and, as the name suggests, stick on when I want to sort of just escape from whatever it may be, emotions, thoughts, etc., and typically go out and do some chores on the farm or something with the horse, and just let my brain take itself forward for a bit rather than being consciously driven.
Very good. So you've obviously got an incredibly high technology business. It's at the cutting edge of the industry and sports science, not just sports science, medical science, and a range of other sciences I'm not clever enough to talk about. So did you need to to have capital investment in equipment, or did you need to sort of keep close ties with academics and that? How did you manage to do it?
Capital investment to start off with was the final installment of my student loan, or the maintenance portion of it, and then a small investment from my parents once I'd graduated, and it looked like I was going to sort of take that forward, which helped me sort of fund the initial production order, and then customer funded for the next 2.5 years. And then we have taken investment since then. So I took a bit of friends and family investment at first, and then that grew into some professional investors thereafter. We've, unlike many peers whom have sometimes sort of raised to survive, we've been very fortunate and only ever taken external funding when it's been to accelerate and take on an opportunity, which I'm quite grateful for, because as I said, there are many businesses out there who they raise investment and then they grow the team, and then they have to raise more money because they're burning it quicker because they've grown the team, and that's the main asset growth. And I just don't think that's a very sustainable business model. No.
So when you started Kymira, you actually had a saleable product, or and customers you knew you could sell to. So how did you manage to do that?
So I started by asking for mills to be nice to me and make me a small sample of the materials that I wanted to use. Mm-hmm. And eventually I persuaded one in Taiwan and one in the US. And I scraped together some money from doing some bar work to then fund a very small purchase order, which was about 100, wasn't even meters, 100 yards. And in the meantime, I managed to find myself a factory in the UK based up in Halifax. So I traveled up to Halifax with my newly purchased fabric, and spent a couple of days up there learning. I taught myself how to do what's called pattern design, so the panels of clothing, and finished some designs off, came back, and then they made them, sent them in the post to me. They arrived in the post the morning of the day I had my first meeting with a prospective buyer. So I rushed down to the local print shop and got some Kymira branding put on them. Got back, wiped the sweat off my brow as the person was arriving to have a meeting with me. And of course, I played on, I'm a student from the university. Please, would you come and meet with me and just give me some advice? Is this the sort of thing that you would buy? And then once I actually committed to starting the business properly, I said, right, well, you said you'd buy these, so I'm going to hold you to your word. And they were one of our first stockists.
So what was the first product?
The first product was a pair of leggings and a base layer top. We have a few of those very first ones in sort of odd sizes that are kicking about in the warehouse today, but they're largely in sort of the archives now.
I know this is sort of a question that sort of often comes up in business, but so if a young guy from university with fairly modest investment is able to start quite a something that's become quite a reasonably branded business with a lot of high tech, cutting edge products. So why weren't other people doing that? When you consider the world such a big place, how were you able to do that? Why was there such a niche in the market anyway?
Well, specifically the infrared on the sporting side, when I'd first had the idea was when I injured myself back when I was 16, 17, and I thought someone else would do that, and they hadn't. I was told what seems like a logical step to you is actually a novel step to other people, and I actually offered to do it for a business that had an infrared technology before I set up Kymira, because I didn't feel like I had the right to start a business. I had no formal business training. And I think they missed the boat, and there are a few that had tried, but they weren't communicating things with scientific integrity. And I think it's always been baked into the core of us that we don't make a claim that's not clinically verified. We speak from an expert position and try and communicate it in lay through to expert terms for those, depending on what you want. And for the niche of the market that we serve, it's typically people who are either educated from an academic standpoint, or they are self-educating because they're curious and they want to be achieving the best that they can. And so they take the time to do the reading. And I think that's always served us very well.
Do you think entrepreneurs are born, or can you become an entrepreneur? And are you one?
It's something that I've spent time thinking about, and certainly in my instance, I always felt like I've had that urge to sort of do something more. But I think you can learn to be an entrepreneur. It's just, there are different types of entrepreneurs, aren't there? There are those that are more classically business trained, and in today's definition, they would count as an entrepreneur. Equally, I was on a business trip once, and I said to a guy about, we entrepreneurs, and he was mortally offended by it, because to him, an entrepreneur was a vacuum salesman. And what
a ridiculous point of view.
Yeah, exactly. He said, no, I'm a businessman, I'm not an entrepreneur. And I said, fine, each to their own.
Well, that's just ignorance, isn't it? Sorry, but yeah. What do you think? What do you think are the attributes? What are the attributes of an entrepreneur, and what attributes do you have that have made Kymira what Kymira is? How do you think? How can you explain that to people who aren't entrepreneurs?
I think a lot of people outside in say that entrepreneurs are risk takers, and actually, I don't think that's the case. I think it's just that there's more conviction, and you do a cost benefit analysis quicker, and so it's not that you're ignoring a risk; it's just you're calculating that risk is something that you can take on and you can mitigate against quicker than perhaps someone who's not got the same conviction or strength of will. So I think conviction really comes into it for me.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. I think that's very, very wise what you just said. I think one of the things as well, I think if you're the pioneer of an idea, you're ahead of the curve, aren't you? So you've already thought about things that other people, haven't thought of because it's not their product. I also quite often see myself as a scout, as I call it. You're ahead of the main body of the cavalry. You can see what's in front of you. The other people are going to take another 2 hours to get there. That's a good way of putting it, I think.
It is, yes. Yes, very good.
So there we are. So we're teaching you all about how to be entrepreneurs. So a lot of it, of course, it comes back to courage and having a great idea and, like your word, conviction. So we've only got 6 minutes of talking time left. So we're going to play your last song now, Tim, which is called Hey Gringo by Kaleo. So why did you pick this?
This is just one that I've had on play a lot recently. I recently took a couple of days off to do a bit of DIY, and I was dancing around the house to this, so I thought everyone else might enjoy dancing along with me.
Good man.
Aspen Waite Radio. Paul Waite.
That's the final track of Tim Brownstone's Uplifting 3 today. I have to say, Tim, in the 6 minutes we've got left, and I was very conscious when I was doing my preparation for today's meeting. You're probably the person most like me of the people I've interviewed.
I say that as a great compliment. Thank you.
I don't know if it is a great compliment to you. Probably a bit worrying if I was you. But even your story over pandemic was a very similar position to myself. Where we were pretty much at a position where Aspen Waite could be pretty much any size. This is one of the things I used to say. I could be any size I want to be. And of course, we've not lived through a pandemic before. You make a whole host of decisions on the basis of what you see in front of you, and then suddenly what you see in front of you is a completely different world, and then you have to react to that. And I see, you were talking about, so you expanded your team by over 100%, 6 new patents over the last period, and then you've had to readjust. How difficult has that been?
The difficult part really was, I mentioned earlier, sort of March through to end of May into June, because our historically main market's been selling into professional and elite sports. And of course, all sports teams, bar one, that in terms of our customers, went offline for the best part of 12 months. And so we had to adapt and drive through from other revenue streams. We had to bring our innovation forwards and start commercializing from the R&D department sooner. And I was looking on the balance sheet, and I won't say, I forget the exact amount, but comparatively this year to last year, we were down to sub 10 grand in the bank account at one point in sort of May. And that's the lowest that it's been for goodness knows how long. And it really was tight. I had to put a load of my life savings back into the business, which, they're back with me now, but to see us through that period, or at least I didn't have to, but to make sure that we could keep going. And the most important thing to me is that we haven't had to make anybody redundant or lose jobs due to the pandemic, which the team are incredibly important to me, and protecting them was important too.
Are you sort of omnipotent in your business, or do you have anybody in your team that challenges you?
I encourage everybody to challenge me, whether they're an intern or whether they're in the senior leadership team. In fact, when it was me that was interviewing interns, one of the questions I would ask is, what do you think we could be doing better from what you've seen, thus far? And the only wrong answer was not to give one, because I asked it because I wanted them comfortable telling the guy there in the business, what he should be doing better. And I think that's important.
So you now have 3 divisions in Kymira, is that right? Sport, medical, and golf, is that?
So we have 3 trading brands, yes, and then we have Kymira Labs, which is sort of where the ongoing innovation happens.
And are you heavily part of that innovation process, or do you have clever scientists working for you?
We have a lot of clever scientists and engineers now. I would love to be more involved, but I've made my bed in the CEO role, and sadly, that doesn't give me the time to actually be in the lab doing the innovation. But I stay as close to it as I can because it enthuses me. It gives me energy to know what. But
are you still the guy that says, "Hey, there's a demand. I think there's a need for this product. We need to go and make that." Does that still happen?
Yes, I'm not the one that's actually working out the electronic engineering and how to innovate new technologies that haven't existed before. Sadly, it's these days it's the engineers and the scientists in the team that are doing that.
I think that's a good thing. You're the ideas man, so you can keep having lots of ideas. And what am I saying? So it's the best way to have products. Having lots of ideas is a good way to have a really good idea. So are you full of ideas man?
I am full of ideas, but I let the ones that I can't shake, they're the ones that other people hear about.
Very good. So the very interesting quote by you again, on a mission to save 1 million lives by 2030. How are you going to do that?
So the new technologies that we are on the cusp of releasing will be in the medical diagnostic space, built into clothing again. And so the headline product there is a garment that will be able to detect a heart attack 2 days before it happens.
No.
And so it will quite simply be by saving people's lives. Yep.
So how is the garment going to convey that information in a way that's going to save the life then?
So it is through using what we refer to as a contextualized data set, so different points of data, to then build a trend map of an individual and then make a diagnostic decision, which is indicative, and therefore, rather than a heart attack happens and then you treat it, the goal is that you bring the individual into medical care to prevent the heart attack from ever happening in the first place, or sometimes they are not preventable, in which case you can manage it. And then the goal is to reduce the incidence of that acute life-threatening event.
Well, Tim, I have to say that was very enjoyable hour. Thank you so much for being so open and talking about all the good things and the bad things. But I think that the bad things help shape the great man you are today. So I always think honesty and passing on to other people is a great thing.
I agree, and thank you for asking such informative questions. It's been a really, really enjoyable discussion.
Thanks, Tim. So that's it. That's Tim Brownstone. That was the Aspen Waite Radio Breakfast Show on Monday, and we'll take you over to the news, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Online, on DAB, and on the